everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Skeleton Crew. I'm your host, Jen Callahan, and today I have a great guest with me. His name is Nicolas. He is a clinical neuroscientist at a company called Neuro Soft Bioelectronics. And today we're going to switch roles, and instead of talking about, bones and AI and things like that we have been talking about most recently, we're going to be talking about the neurological field. So definitely a little switch up and maybe something a little bit more interesting. I was telling Nicolas that, it definitely caught my attention because I worked at a hospital for a while that had level 1 trauma with neurology there. So very interested to hear about what their company is doing. Nicolas, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you.
All right. So let's get into it. Let's kind of just talk about what the company is doing and maybe how you landed there with everybody there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company was founded about 4 years ago by my colleagues, so Nicolas Gninenko and Ludovic Serec. They both did their PhD work here at IPFL, so it's the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and they worked mainly on this new generation of implants of electrodes. So from there was born Neuro Soft Bioelectronics, so which is a company where we develop soft, flexible implants directly aimed to be positioned on the surface of the brain. Mm-hmm. So on my side, I actually worked more on a specific clinical indication, which is tinnitus, which is a chronic ringing in the ears. And we have shown that with non-invasive brain modulation techniques such as neurofeedback, we can help patients to reduce their tinnitus perception. And this is how I reached also with Neurosoft, because there is an idea to explore this with minimally invasive approaches.
Okay. The implants going onto the brain, and if you can't speak to the full depth of this, please just say so. But they're placed onto the brain, and that is there like a pack that's placed somewhere else within the body to control the electrodes?
Absolutely, yeah. So the electrode is one part of the system, so it will be placed directly onto the brain surface. And then it's connected as for example, deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's. They also have what we call an IPG. So it's an implantable pulse generator that is placed usually in the chest or in the abdomen, depending on the application. So this IPG serves as a stimulation, provides the power to actually stimulate the brain.
Okay. And then that can be changed externally, right? Like if they need to change, I guess the signals that are going to the electrode.
Yeah, absolutely. So recent models allow to also change this remotely or through the skin. And you can have different kinds of models that also allow to record and stimulate, for example.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if you've ever seen before, the stimulators that are placed in the back. Sometimes they're in the lumbar region. Sometimes they're up in the thoracic region. And then I don't want to say the battery pack, but I guess the pack that controls it is usually somewhere down along the sacrum. And patients have to come in periodically to get them checked to make sure that the electrodes are still, or the stimulators, I guess I should say, are still in the area where they originally implanted. Again, if you can't speak on this, just say you can't, but is that something that would have to be checked periodically with patients that have the electrodes placed on their brain?
Yes, I think it's a separate component. So the electrodes can remain on the brain, but this also actually needs to be checked, as we have seen with recent news from Neuralink as well. So we don't know if electrodes can stay really located for a very long time, for years. I mean, with these new types of electrodes that are basically not inserted into the brain, but are just placed on the surface. And the separate thing is the IPG, indeed, that needs battery replacement every couple of years, but this is something also that is improving.
Okay. I was reading on the website that the placement of the electrodes is interesting, that it doesn't go just directly onto the brain, that it can be placed like within the folds of the brain as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's why that's the advantage of what we develop here at Neurosoft, is that we have much thinner and softer, 1,000 times softer electrodes that is compared to what is currently on the market. And these allows to reach areas of the brain that deeply buried in the sulci, indeed, because the brain is a highly folded organ, right? So you need, sometimes for some application, you need to reach deeper. Mm-hmm. So we can do that with this kind of technology.
Now, developing this, I'm sure that there had to be like a slew of research that went into it. And I know that this is kind of, where your forte is. Can you discuss with us, maybe the trials that you had to go through, or not trials, but I mean like the timeline of, were you with everyone in the beginning when this idea came to light and then, going through the different research?
Yeah, so I come from more non-invasive technology. So we had this big study with tinnitus patient and with fMRI neurofeedback. So it's a technology that allows patients to learn how to control certain brain activity. So you actually provide a feedback from the brain using the MRI. So you measure activity in the brain and you provide it on a screen as a kind of feedback. And patients can learn to then, with different cognitive strategies, they learn to regulate this activity either up or down. And this is interesting because it shows that we can enhance to some extent the plasticity of the brain through these kind of methods as neurofeedback. And this is relevant for the invasive approach because if you place directly electrode sensing the brain, you have much better signal and much faster signal quality compared to fMRI, for example, or EEG than the non-invasive alternative. And this can enable a new range of applications with new stimulation paradigms and closed loop paradigms for patients to learn how to modulate their activity as an alternative to brain stimulation as well.
So the stimuli that you're talking about during an MRI, is that something that's being done to the patient as they're on the table, or?
Yeah, they're laying in the MRI scanner and they receive directly feedback. So they have a mirror so that they can see a screen. When you display their brain activity, simply speaking. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So you were saying that the electrodes currently right now are, they're not out on the market just yet, but you had said Parkinson's and tinnitus. Now, I'm assuming that, in the beginning of the research, we had discussed it. You had said that, using, mice and rats and monkeys, are these animals actually having these types of, not diseases, but, do they have Parkinson's or do they have tinnitus? Is that something that you can measure?
That's a good question. So about tinnitus, it's there are models of tinnitus induction in animals. Indeed, you can overexpose them to very loud noise or induce it through medication. But of course, they don't have the subjective component, so that the animal will not be able to tell you, report on his perception, right? So there are also methods to assess that with intraneural recordings in animals. But we lack a little bit this. There is a gap between animal research, at least for tinnitus, and human. That's for sure.
Now, Nicolas was telling me that, like I had said, they're still not out on the market. They still have to go through the FDA approval. But so what's the timeline there for you all? You're doing the animal research, and then from there, are you looking into going with humans and then going for the FDA approval? I'm assuming you have to have X amount of studies done where you can go for approval.
So we are indeed going for the FDA approval for the first technology we have, which is called Soft ECOG. So it's for monitoring epilepsy and potentially brain tumor surgeries. And this technology is within the pipeline of the FDA, and we expect within 2 to 3 years probably to be on the market for that. Yeah.
That's great. I'm sure that'll be like some groundbreaking technology out there for patients that are experiencing things like that, especially like, Parkinson's and epilepsy. I can't even imagine having tinnitus. I was reading about it last night and something I've heard of, but I just couldn't even imagine having a constant ringing in my ears, depending on, I'm sure it could be a low hum, it could be extremely high, but anything that could help, because they are symptoms that you can't measure, so you're just going off of what the patient is saying. Or can you measure it? Is that something that can be measured by like an EEG or something?
So we have different approaches. There is indeed the imaging approach, for which you can measure some correlates of the tinnitus, but you're right, there is no objective measure today that is really precise and relevant to characterize tinnitus in a person. But most studies, they rely on subjective assessment. So then you kind of characterize the tinnitus associated distress and burden, and not the loudness itself. But however, we can still do some audiometry. So we assess the tinnitus in a quiet booth by trying to match it with frequency and loudness. And this is one technique that is not an objective measurement, because the patient still reports whether they hear or not different tones. But then it allows to still characterize on a spectrum of frequency and loudness.
Okay. Other neurological diseases that you're looking to, branch into, or are you looking at specific ones right now until you get your clearance?
So there is a broad ranges of neurological disorders that could be addressed with this technology, including, for example, deafness or blindness disorders. We also have with the spinal implants, so you can stimulate the spinal cord as well with this kind of technology. So here you have a whole range of pathologies that can be potentially addressed.
You seem pretty passionate about the field. What did you do before you got in with Neuro Soft?
So I did my PhD thesis at EPFL here in Geneva, in Switzerland, and we did a large clinical trial with tinnitus patients, moderate to severe tinnitus patients, and we have shown that fMRI neurofeedback and EEG neurofeedback can outperform the classical cognitive behavioral therapy that is actually the most recommended treatment and most widely prescribed treatment for tinnitus. But there is no cure for tinnitus. So what we have shown is that these technologies non-invasively can reduce the perception better, at least the associated burden, better than a cognitive therapy. So it means that there is some kind of self-involvement from these patients into the neurofeedback paradigm, that they can learn to reduce their own perception. And this is an interesting result for all the field of invasive or minimally invasive interface.
So lots of stuff going on there, very, very, very involved. Have you guys come across any roadblocks while you've been in the midst of developing this, whether it's research-wise or, externally?
Yes, it's a long path, because there are many mechanisms that need to be probed, at least, and there is also a gap between the pace you can achieve in the research setting and in the on the market. So let's say we face a few challenges with moving fast, but I think that the team here is making a great job, so that we made significant progress in the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Do you have new members joining the team, here or there, or have you all been together kind of since inception?
I joined 2.5 years ago, and the startup was created about 4 years ago. I joined a little bit later, but now, yes, the team is growing. We are about 15 people.
So the clearance, you said FDA approval. Are you talking for the United States, or are you guys looking for, Europe or, other?
We mainly focus on the US market. That's true, but we also look at different other opportunities. Yeah, it depends a little bit on the regulation processes in other countries.
If you don't know this answer, please just say it. But are the regulations in other countries, I'm sure that they differ from the United States, but is one more stringent than the other? Do you know?
I think in the US, it's true that it's probably slightly easier to get on the market with invasive or highly invasive technology. In Europe, it's maybe a bit more regulated recently, also with the new revision of the medical device regulations. But in general, I think that we have also other markets that we can explore outside of these two.
Okay. All right. So just thinking about the electrodes themselves and having being placed directly onto the brain, it sounds like it could be kind of a rather, it's an invasive surgery, I'm assuming you have to cut through the skull, correct? And then to have them be placed onto the brain or into the folds of the brain. Where did you guys, where is the thinking that going the more invasive route as opposed to the less invasive route or non-invasive route? What's the backing behind that? Or the benefit, I guess I should say, or ask.
Yeah, it's a good question. What we show is that with the non-invasive approach, we can achieve a certain benefit for these patients regarding tinnitus in particular. But we have some evidence from the past 20 years of there's been very scarce studies of invasive modulation for tinnitus in very severe cases. And actually, some of the studies, more like case reports, have shown that it is possible to fully suppress the percept, so achieving an even better clinical outcome than what we did with non-invasive technology, right? And so this is the rationale for very severely affected individuals. We would like to try to fully suppress the tinnitus and to reverse these pathological brain networks.
Again, if you can't answer this, it's totally okay. But the surgery that a patient might potentially have to go through to have this done, is it like removing a portion of the skull, or is it cutting part of the skull off and put it back on? Or I have all these images like floating through my head.
It's also a good point. We are aware that not everyone wants an implant, right? Especially that it's very invasive as a procedure. So we are working all the minimally invasive strategies to put that in place. So you might go from large craniotomy, so you don't remove anymore a big part of the skull, but instead of that, you just drill what we call burr holes, for example. You have very, very small holes through which you can deploy or insert our electrodes.
Okay.
And that would be significantly reduce the impact of the surgery as well.
Question that did just pop into my head, thinking about, where it would be implanted, if you did have to do craniotomy, what imaging are you using to figure out what part of the brain that these electrodes need to go onto?
So we basically use a lot of MRI, functional and structural MRI, and CT. Can you see in the intra-op setting to verify that we actually place the electrodes at the correct location? Yeah.
And then I'm assuming too, that certain parts, it's probably so much research has already been done that certain parts of the brain are affected by certain disorders, right? Don't they say, or not don't they say, I could be very wrong. Isn't like your personality and like your frontal lobe, or, certain things are, what I mean? Like certain part of your bodies are controlled by different parts of your brain. I apologize. I do not know much about neurology.
No, it's fine. So there's been extensive research into looking indeed at which location in the brain you may want to place such interfaces. And for tinnitus, it's not obvious, of course, not for any disease. But for example, for Parkinson, is now more and more established that which targets should be targeted with deep brain stimulation, for example, to reduce the tremors, right? However, for tinnitus, it's a novel direction. So it's what has been done is mainly on the auditory cortex, on the temporal regions here. But we also have, today we know that there are more regions of the brain that are involved in chronic tinnitus. And so therefore we can adapt the technology to also reach those.
Okay. Are there disorders that, I know that you're focusing on, a few specific ones right now at this point, but how you were saying that, for the tinnitus, looking at here, would some disorders require the electrodes to be placed on multiple different parts of the brain? So maybe like, here and then up here, or here and here, for maybe tinnitus on both sides of the temporals?
Yes, that's a good point. So indeed, there has been at least one case in which they placed consecutively two electrodes. So one on the auditory cortex and one actually was a cuff electrode behind the neck on the cervical nerve, which is not the brain, but still. And this case has shown that there are different aspects of tinnitus. So there are different frequencies we can suppress with different location and stimulation paradigm. So this indeed shows that there is likely that several locations are needed to be accessed to fully suppress the tinnitus.
And then after these electrodes are placed, is it something that's checked with like MRI again or a CAT scan, to see, or are you basing, I'm trying to think of what I want to say, basing the, information off of maybe patient feedback, or, will be based off of patient feedback, or we use, imaging as well to determine if it's working?
No, it's mainly based on imaging, because you need to verify pre-operatively and also post-operatively whether it's correctly placed on the right anatomical target. So there's careful planning, and then neuronavigation can be used. So it's a technique that allows you to see more or less in real time where you are placing the electrodes. And then, of course, it's verified again with imaging. Yeah.
Great. Super interesting conversation with you today, Nicolas. I really appreciate your time with me. Everybody, Nicolas from Neuro Soft Bioelectronics doing some awesome work to help those out there with neurological disorders. And hopefully that, this hits the market in the next few years, and can help out those that are going through these disorders that, can probably be extremely debilitating. I mean, Parkinson's alone, the way that it progresses, we've seen, celebrities and things, and I'm sure people in our audience might know people with Parkinson's, but, again, tinnitus that Nicolas spoke on extensively about, something that maybe you don't even think about. So thank you, Nicolas. I really appreciate it. Interested to see, what happens in the next couple of years for your company.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Have a great week. You've been watching The Skeleton Crew, brought to you by xraytech.org. On the next episode, join us to explore the present and the future of the rad tech career in the field of radiology.